Chapter 1. The Knock on the Door. Drake Poe had always felt that Pinewood Trailer Park was more than just a cluster of dilapidated homes. Nestled at the edge of a dense, ancient forest, the park exuded an air of desolation and neglect. The residents, a collection of society's outcasts and drifters, went about their lives with a sense of resigned acceptance. Drake was no different. At 35, he was a mechanic by trade, eking out a living fixing cars and odd machines for the few who could afford his services. One late October evening, Drake sat in his recliner, the flickering television casting eerie shadows on the thin walls of his trailer. He sipped on a lukewarm beer, the taste a bitter reminder of his failed dreams and lost ambitions. His only companion was Duke, a grizzled old dog with one ear missing, who lay sprawled on the worn-out carpet. The wind howled outside, rattling the flimsy windows and sending a shiver down Drake's spine. He was about to drift off to sleep when a loud knock on the door startled him. Duke growled lowly, ears perking up. Who could it be at this hour? Drake muttered to himself, setting the beer can down and getting up. He opened the door cautiously, peering into the darkness. A hooded figure stood on the porch, the dim porch light barely illuminating their face. "Drake Poe?" the figure asked in a raspy voice. "Yeah, that's me. Who's asking?" Drake replied, trying to hide his unease. The figure pulled back the hood, revealing a weathered face with piercing blue eyes. "Name's Laura. I need your help." Drake frowned, puzzled. "Help with what? It's pretty late." Laura glanced around nervously before speaking. "It's my sister. She's gone missing. The cops won't help, and I heard you're good at finding things and people." Drake's frown deepened. He had a reputation for fixing things, not for playing detective. "Look, lady, I'm not." "Please," Laura interrupted, desperation in her voice. "She's all I have. I can pay you." Drake sighed, considering the proposition. Money was tight and he could use the extra cash. "All right, come in and tell me more." Laura entered the trailer, her eyes darting around nervously. She took a seat on the edge of the couch, clasping her hands together. "Her name is Megan. She was last seen near the old Simmons place, just past the woods. It's not safe there." Drake raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, not safe?" Laura hesitated before answering. "People say it's haunted, that strange things happen there. But Megan went there anyway, and now she's gone. I know it sounds crazy, but please, Drake." Despite his skepticism, Drake couldn't ignore the genuine fear in Laura's eyes. He glanced at Duke, who seemed to sense the tension and whined softly. "All right," Drake said finally. "I'll take a look, but no promises." Chapter 2. Into the Woods. The next morning, Drake gathered his gear, flashlight, a couple of tools, and a sturdy jacket, and headed out with Duke by his side. The Simmons place was about a mile into the forest, an abandoned farmhouse that had long been the subject of ghost stories and local legends. As Drake walked through the dense trees, the air grew colder, and an unnatural silence settled around him. When he reached the Simmons place, he was struck by its eerie stillness. The farmhouse stood in a small clearing, its windows shattered, and the roof partially collapsed. Vines and moss covered the walls, giving it an almost otherworldly appearance. Duke growled, his hackles raised. "Stay close, boy," Drake whispered, stepping cautiously towards the house. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Drake's flashlight beam danced across the rotting floorboards and peeling wallpaper. He called out Megan's name, but only the echo of his voice answered. As he moved deeper into the house, he noticed strange symbols carved into the walls, symbols that sent a chill down his spine. In the basement, Drake found an old journal half buried in the rubble. The entries were written in a frantic, almost illegible scrawl. They spoke of strange rituals, of voices in the night, and of a darkness that consumed everything. The last entry was particularly disturbing. "They are coming. I hear them in the walls. The shadows. They whisper my name. I must hide. God help me." Drake pocketed the journal, his mind racing. As he turned to leave, he heard a faint noise. A whisper, barely audible. He froze, straining to listen. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, until it became a cacophony of voices, all murmuring his name. Drake! Drake! Panic surged through him, and he bolted up the stairs, Duke close on his heels. Outside, the forest seemed darker, more oppressive. Drake ran, branches tearing at his clothes and face. He didn't stop until he was back at the trailer park, gasping for breath. Laura was waiting for him, her face pale with worry. "Did you find her?" she asked anxiously. Drake shook his head, handing her the journal. "I found this." "Not good, Laura. Whatever happened at that place, it's something beyond our understanding." Laura flipped through the journal, her expression growing more horrified with each page. "What do we do now?" "We need help," Drake said grimly. "Someone who knows about this kind of stuff. I have a friend, David. He's into the paranormal. I'll give him a call." Chapter 3: The Paranormal Expert. David arrived the next day, a tall, lanky man with an air of quiet intensity. He examined the journal carefully, his brow furrowing in concentration. "This is serious," he said finally. "These symbols, the rituals described, it's some kind of summoning. The shadows they mentioned are entities from another realm. If they've taken Megan, it means they're growing stronger." Drake felt a cold knot of fear in his stomach. "Can we stop them?" David nodded slowly. "We can try, but we'll need to perform a counter-ritual to banish them. It won't be easy, and it will be dangerous." Laura's eyes widened. "I'll do whatever it takes to get my sister back." That night, they returned to the Simmons place, armed with candles, salt, and ancient texts. The air was thick with anticipation and dread as David began the ritual, chanting in a language that seemed to vibrate with power. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, pulsing with an otherworldly light. Suddenly, the shadows began to move, coalescing into dark, twisted forms. They writhed and whispered, their voices a maddening chorus. Drake, Laura, and David stood their ground, forming a protective circle of salt around them. "Focus!" David shouted over the din. "We mustn't let them break the circle." The shadows pressed against the barrier, their malevolent presence almost overwhelming. Drake's heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to keep his fear in check. Duke barked fiercely, standing guard at the edge of the circle. As the ritual reached its climax, a blinding light filled the room, and the shadows recoiled, shrieking in pain. The ground trembled, and the air grew thick with the stench of burning sulfur. Then, with a final burst of light, the shadows vanished, leaving only an eerie silence in their wake. Drake and Laura looked around, breathless. The farmhouse was still and empty. For a moment, it seemed like their efforts had been in vain. But then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, disheveled and pale, but unmistakably alive. "Megan!" Laura cried, rushing to her sister's side. Megan looked dazed but unharmed. "Laura, what happened? Where am I?" "It's over," Laura said, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe now." Drake felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had done it. They had faced the darkness and won. Chapter 4: Aftermath. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal at Pinewood Trailer Park. Drake went back to fixing cars, and Laura and Megan began to rebuild their lives. But the experience left a lasting mark on all of them. The shadows of the past lingered, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edges of their world. Drake often found himself staring into the forest, wondering what other secrets it held. He knew that the fight against the darkness was far from over, but for now, they had won a small victory, and that was enough. As the first snowfall of winter blanketed the trailer park, Drake sat in his recliner, Duke at his feet, and allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The shadows were still out there, but so were the light and the hope that kept them at bay. And in the quiet of the night, Drake whispered a silent promise to himself, to always stand against the darkness, no matter the cost. Chapter 5: Whispers in the Night. The days grew shorter as winter tightened its grip on Pinewood Trailer Park. The snow lay thick on the ground, muffling sounds and casting an eerie stillness over the area. Drake noticed small, subtle changes around the park. Doors creaking open on their own, lights flickering without cause, and strange cold spots in even the warmest trailers. One particularly cold night, Drake was jolted awake by Duke's frantic barking. He grabbed his flashlight and hurried outside, the beam cutting through the inky darkness. Duke stood at the edge of the forest, growling and snapping at the unseen. "What's wrong, boy?" Drake called out, his breath forming frosty clouds in the air. Duke barked again, a deep, guttural sound that sent a chill down Drake's spine. He followed the dog's gaze, his flashlight revealing a figure standing just inside the tree line. Drake's heart raced as he recognized the figure. It was Megan. "Megan? What are you doing out here?" Drake shouted, but there was no response. He moved closer, the snow crunching under his boots. As he approached, Megan turned and vanished into the forest. Panic surged through Drake as he chased after her, calling her name. The trees closed in around him, their skeletal branches reaching out like twisted fingers. "Megan!" Drake's voice echoed through the woods, but there was no answer. He stumbled upon a clearing and froze. In the center of the clearing stood an old well, its stones covered in frost and moss. The air around it felt heavy, as if the very atmosphere was suffused with malevolence. Drake approached the well cautiously, peering over the edge. The darkness inside seemed to swallow the light of his flashlight. He could feel the cold radiating from within, a deep, unnatural cold that seeped into his bones. Suddenly, a whisper reached his ears, faint and distant. "Drake, help me." "Megan," Drake called out, his voice trembling. "Where are you?" The whisper came again, more insistent. "Drake, down here." Drake's mind raced. He knew this was wrong, that something was terribly amiss, but he couldn't abandon Megan. Taking a deep breath, he tied a rope around a nearby tree and secured it to his waist. With Duke whimpering beside him, Drake began his descent into the well. Chapter 6. The Descent. The further Drake descended, the colder it became. The walls of the well were slick with moisture, and the air was filled with the scent of damp earth. His flashlight flickered, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Drake's heart pounded in his chest as he reached the bottom. The well opened into a cavern, its walls covered in strange, glowing symbols. Drake's breath caught in his throat as he saw Megan standing at the far end, her back to him. "Megan!" he called out, his voice echoing. "It's me, Drake." Megan turned slowly, her eyes vacant and her face twisted in an expression of terror. "Drake, you shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice sounding distant and hollow. Before Drake could respond, the shadows around them began to shift and writhe, coalescing into dark, twisted forms. The temperature plummeted, and a deep, resonant voice filled the cavern. "You have trespassed where you do not belong, mortal." Drake felt a cold hand grasp his shoulder, and he spun around to face a tall, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. "Who are you?" Drake demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. The figure's eyes bore into Drake's soul. "I am the Keeper of Shadows. You have interfered with forces beyond your understanding. Now you will pay the price." Drake struggled against the grip of the shadows, but they were too strong. He could feel his strength waning as the darkness enveloped him. In a last, desperate effort, he shouted to Megan, "Run, Megan! Get out of here!" Megan's eyes widened with fear and determination. She bolted towards the entrance of the cavern, the shadows reaching for her but falling short. Drake watched as she disappeared into the darkness, the shadows closing in around him. Chapter 7. The Keeper's Bargain. The Keeper's eyes glowed brighter as it tightened its grip on Drake. "You have courage, mortal, but it will not save you. However, I offer you a choice. Surrender yourself to the shadows, and your friends will be spared." Drake's mind raced. He knew that the shadows would consume him, but if it meant saving Megan and Laura, he had no other option. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Take me, but leave them alone." The keeper's grip loosened slightly, and it nodded. "Your sacrifice is accepted. The shadows will not harm them for now." As the darkness closed in, Drake felt his consciousness slipping away. The last thing he saw was the keeper's malevolent grin, and then everything went black. Chapter 8. The Escape. Megan stumbled through the forest, her heart pounding. She could hear the whispers of the shadows growing fainter behind her. She knew she had to get back to the trailer park to find Laura and David. She burst out of the woods and ran towards the trailer park, gasping for breath. Laura and David were waiting outside Drake's trailer, their faces pale with worry. "Megan!" Laura cried, rushing to embrace her sister. "What happened? Where's Drake?" Megan shook her head, tears streaming down her face. He sacrificed himself to save us. The shadows, they took him." David's face grew grim. "We need to find a way to bring him back. There has to be something in the journal." They hurried inside the trailer, flipping through the pages of the journal, searching for answers. As they read, a sense of dread settled over them. The ritual to banish the shadows had only been a temporary solution. The true battle was far from over. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The days turned into weeks, and the residents of Pinewood Trailer Park began to notice more strange occurrences. Unexplained noises, sudden temperature drops, and the feeling of being watched became a common experience. Laura, Megan, and David worked tirelessly, studying the journal and seeking out anyone who might know how to defeat the shadows for good. One evening, as they were deep in their research, a knock on the door startled them. Laura opened it to reveal an elderly woman with piercing green eyes. She introduced herself as Eliza, a local historian and occult expert. "I heard about your troubles," Eliza said, her voice steady. "I know what you're up against, and I might be able to help." Laura and David exchanged hopeful glances. "Please come in," Laura said, ushering Eliza inside. Eliza sat down, her gaze intense. "The shadows you encountered are ancient entities, bound to this world by a powerful curse. To defeat them, you must find the source of their power and destroy it." David frowned. "And where do we find this source?" Eliza's eyes darkened. "The source lies deep within the forest, in a place known as the Heart of Shadows. It's a treacherous journey, but it's the only way to save your friend and rid this place of the shadows once and for all." Chapter 10. The Heart of Shadows. Armed with Eliza's guidance, Laura, Megan, David, and Duke set out on a perilous journey into the heart of the forest. The air grew colder and more oppressive with each step, and the trees seemed to close in around them. As they ventured deeper, the forest came alive with eerie sounds and ghostly apparitions. Shadows flitted between the trees, whispering Drake's name and trying to lure them off the path. But they pressed on, determined to reach the Heart of Shadows. After hours of treacherous travel, they arrived at a massive, ancient tree surrounded by a circle of stones. The air was thick with malevolent energy, and the shadows danced menacingly around them. Eliza stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. "This is it, the Heart of Shadows. We must perform the ritual here and destroy the source of their power." David began to draw symbols on the ground, while Laura and Megan prepared the candles and salt. As they worked, the shadows grew more aggressive, trying to break through their protective circle. Duke barked and snapped at the darkness, keeping it at bay. Chapter 11. The Final Battle. As the ritual began, the ground trembled, and a deep, resonant voice filled the air. "You dare challenge us, mortals? You will pay for your insolence." The shadows coalesced into the form of the Keeper, its red eyes glowing with fury. "Your friend is ours, and soon you will be too." Laura stood her ground, her voice unwavering. "We won't let you take him. We will end this." The Keeper laughed, a sound that chilled them to the bone. "Very well. Let the battle begin." The shadows surged forward, clashing with the protective circle. Laura, Megan, and David fought with all their strength, chanting the ancient words and holding the darkness at bay. The Keeper's presence grew stronger, its malevolent power threatening to overwhelm them. Just as their strength began to wane, A familiar voice echoed through the clearing. "Keep fighting. Don't give up." Drake's voice, strong and defiant, filled them with renewed determination. They redoubled their efforts, their voices rising in unison. The symbols on the ground glowed brightly, and the shadows recoiled, writhing in pain. With a final, powerful chant, the heart of shadows erupted in a blinding light. The keeper let out a deafening roar as it was consumed by the light, the shadows dissipating into nothingness. Chapter 12. A New Beginning. As the light faded, the forest grew still and quiet. The oppressive darkness was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. Laura, Megan, and David stood in the clearing, breathing heavily but triumphant. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and a figure emerged from the shadows. Drake, his face pale but determined, stepped forward. "You did it. You saved me." Laura rushed to him, tears of relief streaming down her face. "We couldn't have done it without you, Drake." Drake smiled, a sense of peace washing over him. "It's over. The shadows are gone." Life at Pinewood Trailer Park slowly returned to normal, but the memory of their ordeal left a lasting mark on everyone involved. Drake, Laura, Megan, and David continued to rebuild their lives, grateful for their newfound peace. However, as winter gave way to spring, Drake couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered in the forest. One night, as he sat in his recliner with Duke at his feet, he heard a faint whisper on the wind. "Drake! Drake!" His heart skipped a beat as he glanced towards the forest. The shadows were gone, but the darkness was never truly defeated. There would always be secrets hidden in the depths of the woods, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And Drake knew that their fight was far from over. The end, for now.